All right, welcome to this explainer. We are jumping straight into something incredibly intense today. We're going to break down the extreme psychology of the solo athlete. And look, we aren't just talking about swiping your gym tag and putting your headphones on. We are exploring how the macro psychology of living a highly independent, solo lifestyle is literally weaponized into a relentless, monastic weight training philosophy. Let's dive into how the exact same mental framework that allows someone to thrive completely independently out in society is used by the solo lifter to achieve absolute, raw physical peak performance. So here is a quick look at our roadmap. We'll hit the stigma of being solo, the psychological benefits of singlehood, voluntary versus involuntary singlehood, the monastic athlete mindset, stoicism and voluntary hardship, and finally, the gym as sanctuary. It's a journey that bridges a macro lifestyle straight into the micropsychology of intense, isolated weight training.
Okay, starting right off with Section 1, the stigma of being solo. We really have to start by looking at how the lone wolf gym goer faces society's baseline assumptions head-on.
Now, you might have heard of the term singleism. It was actually coined by psychologist Bella DePaulo to describe the stereotyping and discrimination single individuals face in our very couples-oriented culture. But let's apply this directly to modern fitness. We live in an era that is just utterly obsessed with community workouts, right? Think about the massive boom of CrossFit classes, the really loud weekend run clubs, and just the inherent societal assumption that you always need a spotter or a workout buddy to push you to your absolute limits. The solo athlete faces a micro version of this singleism every single time they step onto the gym floor. They're often viewed as antisocial, maybe overly intense, or even a bit arrogant simply because they reject group fitness. Society tends to automatically assume that working out alone means you're isolated or you're somehow lacking motivation. But recognizing that this stigma is entirely socially constructed, that is the first vital psychological milestone. The lone lifter doesn't view solo training as a deficit at all. They view it as the ultimate foundation for intense, undisturbed personal mastery.
Moving right along to Section 2, Psychological Benefits of Singlehood, let's look at the actual, studied science of how this translates to the individual athlete.
Modern psychology shows us that thriving solo yields some absolutely incredible traits. We're talking greater personal growth, exceptionally high self-reliance, and profound emotional clarity. But how exactly does this manifest for the solo athlete? Well, for the lone lifter, high self-reliance means creating their own rigorous programming completely from scratch. It means having the emotional intelligence to honestly diagnose their own physical weaknesses and holding themselves ruthlessly accountable when absolutely no one else is watching. Their robust network isn't a loud, chatty group fitness class. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a carefully curated internal ecosystem of recovery, focus, and deliberate isolation. By navigating their physical journey solo, they cultivate a level of emotional clarity where they learn to prioritize their own internal biological feedback over the distracting noise of a crowded weight room.
Which brings us to Section 3, voluntary versus involuntary singlehood. This is where the psychological impact of solitude is truly defined.
You see, the psychological impact of solitude depends entirely on whether it is a conscious choice. And the gym floor is the absolute perfect testing ground for this. Consider the involuntary solo gym goer. This is someone who's working out alone simply because they couldn't find a friend to tag along that day. As a result, they feel a bit intimidated, maybe highly self-conscious, and they're incredibly vulnerable to the societal pressure of a busy gym environment. Now contrast this sharply with the voluntary solo athlete. This individual operates with incredibly high well-being and low neuroticism because they actively choose to isolate themselves to achieve peak focus. They are intentionally building a psychological fortress of self-awareness. When you are voluntarily solo, you aren't avoiding training partners out of fear, you are actively choosing the silence. And that intentional fortress is exactly what allows the solo athlete to push past total physical failure.
So, the burning question here is, how exactly do we take that macro-level autonomy, that crazy high self-reliance and impenetrable emotional clarity, and weaponize it against a barbell?
To answer that, we get into Section 4, the monastic athlete mindset. We are stepping into the gritty, intense world of the lone lifter.
We call this monastic or stoic training. Just think about the atmosphere of a modern commercial gym for a second. It is loud. It is saturated with bright neon lights, selfie rings, perfectly curated playlists, and just endless social chatter. The monastic athlete looks at that entire ecosystem and completely rejects it. No way. They purposefully strip away every single modern fitness comfort and distraction to create an environment that is raw and highly disciplined. They seek out the cold, utilitarian corners of the weight room. By removing the social elements and all that superficial hype, they pare the experience down to biological truth. They aren't there to socialize, network, or be seen. They're there to execute a highly meditative, physically devastating task in total isolation.
The absolute foundation of this monastic approach is an unshakable internal locus of control, 0. That is exactly the number of gym partners they need to push them. 0 is the amount of external validation, social media praise, or applause required for them to hit a new personal record. Imagine being pinned under a heavy 400-pound squat. If you have a spotter standing directly behind you, your brain subconsciously knows there is a safety net. The solo athlete actively removes that net. 0 spotters means absolute, terrifying accountability. Because this individual has mastered voluntary solitude, their drive comes entirely from within. You either lift the weight or you fail. It is literally the ultimate, rawest expression of self-directed drive in existence.
Achieving this level of absolute presence requires a gritty process known as cognitive forcing. Step 1. Remove distractions, which crucially means no headphones, no pounding music to artificially hype them up. This auditory deprivation actually forces the central nervous system to heighten its sensitivity, naturally priming the body for massive muscle fiber recruitment. Step 2. Because they are in total silence, they listen entirely to biofeedback. They rely on the visceral rhythm of their own breathing and use their pounding heart rate as a biological metronome, which leads directly to Step 3, establishing an extreme mind-muscle connection. Without the mental escape hatch of a smartphone screen or an upbeat playlist, their cognitive focus on the mechanics of every single repetition becomes razor sharp. They cannot escape the discomfort of the workout. They must sink fully into it.
Section 5. Stoicism and voluntary hardship. This takes all that intense mental focus and translates it directly into brutal physical endurance.
The Stoic athlete actively seeks out physical friction. They outright refuse to wear lifting gloves or supportive wrist wraps. They want to feel the raw, cold bite of the barbell knurling digging into their hands. They accept the ripped calluses and the burning grip fatigue as necessary, honest feedback from the iron. Even more fascinating is the psychology behind rejecting pre-workout chemical stimulants. Instead of relying on an artificial spike of caffeine to survive a grueling leg day, they want to train their dopamine baseline naturally. By refusing artificial hype, they train their own mind to summon aggression, intensity, and focus entirely on command. They are utilizing physical suffering not as the end goal, but as the heavy anvil on which they forge unbreakable mental resilience, an elite psychological skill that translates directly to their life outside the gym walls.
Finally, Section 6, the gym as sanctuary. Ultimately, this voluntary hardship creates something profoundly transformative.
When you approach weight training with this monastic, highly autonomous mindset, it completely ceases to be just a workout. It becomes a war. But it is not a war against the iron. The barbell is simply an objective truth teller. It never lies, it never coddles, and it demands absolute physical presence. The battle is against your own internal weaknesses, your inherent laziness, and your self-doubt. The gym transforms into a quiet, solitary sanctuary where repetitive, intense physical labor physically clears the mind. Extreme physical exhaustion acts as a complete chemical reset for the brain. All the stress, the psychological burdens of the day, and the endless noise of society are processed and expelled through sheer, relentless exertion. It is a daily, cathartic ritual of ultimate self-mastery.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider the next time you find yourself stepping up to a heavy barbell in total silence. Being alone is merely a state of circumstance, but mastering solitude, whether that is navigating life as a fiercely self-reliant individual or executing a brutal training session with unmedicated solitary focus, that is a choice. It is a rare and powerful skill. So the next time the gym gets quiet, are you just waiting for the noise to return, or are you actively using that silence to forge a stronger version of yourself?